2, 1.
This video will tackle about the evidence and how we appreciate the language change in the lives of human and in society. Language change is a change of a language over a period of time. Language change have been studied by social linguists and historical linguists. So these two linguists has studied both the change of the language. So the historical linguists have studied the language over a period of time, which we call it diachronic change. So while the social linguist is the one who studied the synchronic change of a language, meaning synchronic change is causes of how a certain language is being changed in a certain society or in a certain period. So like for example, we have the diachronic change. So before, as our ancestors have used the baybayin, like before they're using that language through their communication, so they're able to express themselves. So as the time goes on, as the time goes by, so now in this new generation, so we are in a Gen Z, so the language have been like evolve. So we are now using different forms of language, but in connection with the language that we have used before with our ancestors. So, like for synchronic change, its example for me, as I have understand with the topic being discussed a week ago by Sir Alvin. So, synchronic change, for example, as I've understand, is that how this language has changed in a particular period. Change is somewhat a change in a language without considering the form of its history. So like it's creating its own language. Chronic change, this is the evolution of a language shared by a particular special region, such a word being used by a certain society and the other society in the same period, but then uh, uh, it suddenly disappeared. Okay, it has been changed into a new form of language, but the same meaning. Also has something to do with the comparison of language or the dialects being used by society. The language has classified into language family. So language family, these are the language that has descended from a single ancestor, a single ancestor which relates by virtue. For example, we have the Bisaya, and then we have the Cebuano, which is which share the same virtue of a language, and it has the same meaning. So they came from a single ancestral, I think, because if you are going to take with the Cebuano language and in the Visaya language, they are the same. But somehow the Cebuano is having a deeper Visayan accent. Yes. So while we have the Waray language and we have the Wari language, diba? So it's a kind of sharing the same virtue, and it came from a single ancestral that has descended now in a new generation. Language change has its four classification. So we have the isolating, the agglutinating, the inflecting, and the polysynthetic classification of language. Isolating language is a one-to-one correspondence between words and morphemes. So, like for example, a morphemes is being translated to another word which is a morpheme too. So it cannot be added by an affix, neither dependent to another word to form a word. Rather, it stands on its own. So in this classification, so language is a given position by a free morphemes which is unalterable and are not usually marked by affixes or any grammatical device to form a word. Rather, it uses itself as a word alone. Is somehow a language isolation, which refers to having its own family language. So, for example, a Chinese word, and is translated to an English word. So they are being isolated in language. So Chinese has a different forms of morpheme, and the English word forms have also their different free morphemes, but they are both free morphemes and can stand in its position. So it's not being added by any affixes or grammatical devices, and are not unalterable, like Wu Kanta, or in English, I see him. Flexional classification of language, it uses both the bound and the free morphemes for it to stand on its position. So like for example, we have the talk and talked or talks, and it has its internal changes, like for example the mouse or the mice, rise and rose, or rose from the dead, arise from the dead, like that. Fusional or fusional has it uses several units of meaning and are contained in a single word. So like for example, it is being tackled in Latin, I be or ib, I shall go. So for I stands for go, and be as the first person singular. So I shall go now. So while the agglutinating classification of a language, I'm having a little bit of confusion. But then, as it being said or tackled, agglutinating has is in connection with the flexional language, with the exemption that the morphemes attached have a separate existence. So meaning that this agglutinating language is a language being used or having with boundaries between the morphemes, but these boundaries are always clear because it remains in its shape. And the last one classification of language is the polysynthetic or the incorporating language. So in this language, it is in used with the affixation, and often incorporate that what English would represent with nouns and adverbs. So like for example, if an affix they're using a single affix, and that affix, like for example G, it has a representation in English word which is the G for the I, first person. Of course, it is in a specific language or in a certain society being used. Tons of language are very useful. Of course, it is very useful in tackling or in description to the language change, or it's a physical change of a language over a period of time, or how does language change. It's because of its classification that it helps to explain the kind of changes that occur.
Changes that has occurred in a language in a certain period are clearly appreciated as we goes on in our lives and becoming more influential and developed. Language also have not forgotten and left as it is carried along as humanity progresses.